I'm here with Jim Richey, Lakewood's first mayor, Linda Shaw, the first woman elected as mayor, and former city council member Carl New, to talk about Lakewood's first 40 years. Well, first of all, welcome. It's really a pleasure to have all three of you here, and something I've been looking forward to for a long, long time. And I think we'll just tell stories. But let me start out with Jim. You're the first mayor of Lakewood, and talk about the idea of forming a city back in the late 60s, how that came about.
Well, actually, the effort in 1969 was the fifth effort to incorporate eastern Jefferson County. Obviously, the first four failed, and the fifth one was successful, I think, for two basic reasons. One, there was much pride in the Jefferson County school system, and during that time, the city and county of Denver was flexing their muscles about trying to expand. There was no limitation about where they could go, and the thought of giving up the school system, I think, was a motivating factor. The second motivating factor was the fact that we had a crime situation going on where...
Was that the garage bandit?
Yeah, they called him the garage rapist. Oh. And anyway, the concern of the citizens, they recognized that at any one shift, there was only 1.5 sheriff patrol cars to take care of what's now Lakewood. So those two things, I think, were highly motivating factors in making June of '69 a successful election. And
how about the drawing of the boundaries? How did that come about?
Well, Mr. Mayor, not very sophisticated. Down in my basement, I had a ping pong table, and I took a map of eastern Jefferson County and a black felt pencil or pen, and drew the boundaries. It wasn't too complicated. You had Sheridan on the east and Hamden on the south, and I thought 32nd on the north and on the west was a little more complicated. But an interesting part of that was after having drawn the boundaries, the individual who was the head of the Wheat Ridge Incorporation called me one Saturday and asked if he could come over to my house, and I said, sure. He came over and he said, Jim, my mother lives right here around 32nd, and we've been native of Wheat Ridge for so long, would you mind redrawing that? I said, no big deal. So a new map and new felt pencil. And
government was a little easier in those days, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it was accepted by the judge.
Yeah, and that's what's important. Linda, you were the city's fourth mayor and the first woman elected to the position, and I know that was very significant at the time. Tell us about that.
When I ran for mayor, and this is 14 years after the city had begun, and when I ran as a woman, the question most frequently asked of me by the press and every candidate forum I went to is, how will you do it all since you're a woman? How will you be mayor? How will you have a full-time job? How will you be a spouse? And how will you take care of your children? And how will you handle it all? And I replied, the same as the three men before me who were mayor, had full-time jobs, had a spouse, and had children. But that was the environment. It was also in the early 80s, when you were a female candidate, one did not put your children's picture on the brochure because there was still a little bit of, we should be staying home, taking care of them instead of doing something like what I was doing. So I would list my children, but I wouldn't give, too much information, and they were never on the brochure. It was just the woman, and that was it. So it was an interesting time period. But, when you're the woman mayor in an environment where there aren't a lot of women elected officials, I always maintained that when I went to a community meeting, I stood out. I was so frequently in the room of men, and everyone around the table's a man, and I'm the only woman. They remembered who I was when I left.
That
was good.
Were there no other women mayors at the time?
Not of large cities.
Yeah.
No, very, very. During my term as mayor, which was 8 years, at one point I saw from National League of Cities some sort of ranking of cities over 100,000 people that had a female elected mayor, and I was one of about 15 in the United States at that time. There were a lot of women in the small towns.
We're talking just 20, 25 years
Yes,
ago.
we are. Yes, we are.
That's remarkable. Carl, you were on city council from 75?
75,
to
right.
79.
I moved here just as Lakewood was formed. In fact, I still have a credit card that said Jefferson City, that brief period in there.
Jefferson City.
Yeah, from the Denver Drive. Both have changed their names. And so 75 until 79.
What prompted you to get involved at that
a vacancy.
We both ran for it.
That's all right. Let
And
it
he won.
let it
Open up a
go.
little relationship.
So
There
you
was a
ran against each
vacancy.
other?
Well, it was a council appointed.
Yeah,
Oh, I
Betty
see.
Miller resigned.
was appointed
Oh,
by
that's
Dick
right.
Lamb to his cabinet. He'd been elected governor in '74, and so one night my wife said, "Why don't you put your name in?" Decision I think she may have come to regret after all the meetings I was attending. But and so Linda was one of the people who did also, and lo and behold, much to my surprise, I was chosen to fill that vacancy, and then ran for 2 subsequent terms afterwards, because back in those days we still had 2-year terms.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But let me give you the interesting part. After he gets on council, and then he's got to run twice, and so he comes to me and asks me if I would run his campaign, because I was a competitor. So I ran both of his campaigns, and when he said he wasn't running anymore, and I wanted to run for the same council seat that he had, I went to him and asked if he would run my campaigns, and he ran my 2 city council and my 2 mayoral campaigns. So
Great cooperation.
That's
Yes.
great. It was very good.
But it was a little bit of a preemptive strike, but she got even with me.
Jim, one of the things that Lakewood is still known for today is the high caliber of our police department.
Yes.
And you all were involved in the early days. And what prompted the decision to require a college education for our police agents? That was pretty rare at the time.
Actually, in the summer of '69, prior to the actual election of officials, 3 of us got together and brainstormed the concept of creating a police department from scratch. And we agreed that we had a rare opportunity to do something very unique. And one of the things we agreed on was to try to soften the image of police vis-a-vis the citizens.
Sure.
So in considering that, we thought, well, how about education? Is that a factor? And following that path, we said that we would ask for a college degree from anybody. It's mandatory. And we'd do something different, like going on to gray slacks and blue blazers. And that we would change the nomenclature of the various individuals within the department. For example, a sergeant became an agent in charge, or an AIC. Well, some of that made a lot of sense and did well with, but much of it we had to change. For example, when an AIC from Lakewood contacted a sergeant from New York, the sergeant from New York wasn't very comfortable about who he was talking to.
Didn't get the respect they deserved. Yeah.
But anyway, the education factor has continued, and the thing I guess I would be most proud of is the development of the police department. It's a nationally recognized department. At last count, I think we had 64 agents who had become chiefs of departments around the whole United States. There was a time, I have a daughter that lives in Boulder. There was a time I could leave Lakewood and drive to Boulder and be with a chief that came from Lakewood.
Yeah.
That's
that's the seed you planted has germinated to what is still one of the best police departments in the United States. Well, I know you all have wonderful stories to tell about those years in office. What are some of your favorite times from the 70s and 80s and late 60s?
Well, starting off, the morning after the election, I woke up, I guess with a hangover. It said, what? I'm mayor of a city of 100,000 people, and we have no employees, no money, no ordinances, no rolling stock.
No city hall.
Somebody's got to be kidding me.
Be careful what you wish for, huh, Jim?
But I asked for meetings about twice a week, and we would meet in typically in a grade school in their cafeteria, and trying to set mature bodies onto a very small platform was not easy, but we did. And I think the enthusiasm and dedication of those original council people was something I'll never forget.
I think I heard a story about a snowstorm, Labor Day weekend snowstorm, and council people involved in the cleanup, is that?
I think the incorporation election was like the last week in August, something like that. And on Labor Day, we had a 20-inch snowstorm, broke down on limbs all over the city. And naturally, the city being incorporated, the citizens expected service a couple weeks later. Well, one of the council members came from the waste disposal industry, and he knew most of the people, and he kind of got them together and got them to agree to furnish their trash trucks, their hauling trucks, if we would provide the manpower to go behind them. Well, the manpower became the mayor and the city council. And one of the Wheat Ridge owners that volunteered his truck had a brand new truck. I don't know what it was, but a multi-$1,000 truck. A couple of members of council got carried away and put a limb on there that wasn't a limb, it was a trunk of a tree. And it broke the gear in this new truck.
Oh, boy.
And he wasn't too happy, really, but that was a true story of how we picked up the original limbs.
Yeah, those were exciting times. Carl, you were involved in the, if I remember right, the creation of the city logo?
No, the charter. I chaired the charter commission, but I wasn't involved with the logo.
Okay,
Right.
all right. My mistake. Well, tell us about the charter commission days.
It seems, as Jim pointed out, there were several attempts to get the city formed, and that was true of the charter also. And I think, let's see, it had to be about 80 or 81, right in that time frame. We decided to go for it again. But at that time, a lot of the initiation of the charter was coming from the city, and they were having trouble getting citizens to, I guess, should I trust the city or not. So a group of us did it by petition, and we formed a charter commission. And Fran Yaley was one of the co-chairs of that. And then the charter commission put together a charter. Did not pass the first time, but we had 120 days to cure, and it was basically small things that they wanted changed, and we were successful. And then Linda was the first mayor to actually serve under the provisions of that charter. We had to get it kind of hurried along.
I was the first mayor that came under the term limitations segment of the charter, because until the charter was approved, you could run as many times as you want. So term limits for 4-year terms and 2 4-year terms came with the charter. So when my 8 years were up, there were a number of people who said, "Why aren't you running again?" And I said, "Term limits, it's in the charter." And I had many a person say to me, "Oh, we didn't mean that for you."
You didn't tell me that. I could have put that provision in.
Anyway, it was a good decision. No regrets.
Right. Well, and the charter has prevailed. There's been very few changes to it, and most of them have been housekeeping type changes, right?
And the term limits, the state of Colorado followed suit. Once again, Lakewood was
a leader.
well ahead of the time. You were a teacher?
Yes,
Linda?
that's right. Full-time school teacher, 6th grade teacher, and gifted education at Belmar Elementary School, and kind of a novelty because teachers don't usually become mayors. So we had lots of camera people in the classroom filming my children at school, and they got quite used to hearing the stories of what goes on. And sometimes I'd run in from a breakfast meeting and say, "You won't believe what the governor said this morning." And so they'd get a few little stories before we'd go off with the lessons of the day. But you know, I have some kids out of those classes who are political leaders today, and I think I influenced their lives, and it was good. It was just a very busy time.
I'll ask each of you, what are you most proud of? Jim, you mentioned the police department that is still one of the best in the country today. What else?
Well, I think the police department would definitely rank number one. Underneath that are things like the continuation of people who are really dedicated, like Carl and like Linda and like you.
Thank you.
That is meaningful because you read about communities, cities that having all kinds of problems, and most of those problems, if you trace them all the way, they have to do with ethics and a feeling that an individual is bigger than what he should be, he or she.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, you all, I just, well, I have the chance, I want to tell you how much I appreciate the path that you laid for all of us. I mean, we have the privilege of working in a city and for a group of citizens, and you left a legacy of strong leadership and a legacy of integrity that makes our jobs a lot easier today. So we all thank you very, very much for that.
Well, it was interesting that in spite of our being an overnight city, that we rather quickly established enough identity within the metro area that we did have a voice. You would think that you attend mayor's meetings and no one would even relate to you.
Who are these new kids on the block, right?
Mayor Bill McNichols, some way adopted me, put me under his wing, and did a lot of good things for me. At the same time, his deputy manager was about as anti-Lakewood as could be, so they kind of balanced off.
Well, I want to take off on that because, right, you know, when I came into office, the same year that I was elected is the year that Federico Pena was elected mayor of Denver. We served the same 8 years. He just came in May, and I came in November. So I worked very, very closely with him, and kind of the buzzword of my term of office was metropolitan cooperation. And while Jim had, you know, connections with, you know, mayor of Denver and so forth, there was still a lot of community feeling here that why would you want to help Denver? They're just trying to get our money to help them with their projects, and we're Lakewood over here. I disagreed with that philosophy. I said repeatedly, it takes a healthy Denver to have a healthy Lakewood. And if Denver is crumbling, you're not going to have this wonderful, strong suburb out here, and that we needed to work together. So during my term, there were lots and lots of meetings. Federico put together the mayors of the 7 largest cities at that time, and that was called the group that got together and met and looked at metro issues. And Lakewood was involved in what was back then, the Colorado Convention Center, and I went to the legislature and testified on behalf of Denver that the legislature, Colorado, should give some money to that convention center. We worked on Coors Field, and Lakewood, I don't know if you know this, did $3 million of tax-exempt bonds to help on the funding of that particular project. So that was another part of metro cooperation. So we did a lot of things like that, a lot of discussions on water, transportation. I think you're seeing some of the results now of those preliminary discussions way back when, air quality issues. So we were, that was really an important time.
That foundation was laid then for the regionalism that we see now, that the Denver area is still known for.
And I even had at that point, the local newspaper who had supported me was kind of still criticizing, why are you giving away our money? And I continued to say, we're a part of a metro region. We all need to work together.
I guess that's probably a little bit understandable given Jim's story of the motivation for incorporation in the
So why do you want to help Denver?
Right,
but
right. Yeah, exactly. Fascinating. What about, there must be some good stories from the old days.
I want to give one. I want one. Okay, Fox Hollow. It didn't open during my term, but the decision for Fox Hollow happened during my term. And it was very, very controversial. And we had many a city council meeting. And you would look out in the audience, and half of the audience was men, very few women, in golf shirts, the polo shirts and so forth. You could tell exactly who they were. And then here's the other half over there, and there was a group of the environmentalists who were certain that we were going to ruin the environment if we put a golf course on that particular piece of land. And it got rather heated, and we would have hearing, and they'd come and they'd testify, and you know, by the dress of the people, you could tell what they were going to say when they came up to the microphone. You knew what was going to happen, and it kept going and kept going. So one night, the city manager at that time, after a particularly difficult meeting, the city manager said to me, Linda, let's just put this Fox Hollow on the back burner for a while. He says, it's too contentious. We have too much disagreement on it. You know, these people will kind of go away, and we'll come back and bring it up later and move forward then. And I said, no. We're going forward. We're not putting it on the back burner. I believe that I've listened to enough people in this community and been to enough meetings that this is what the community wants, and we're moving forward. There was some legal action taken to stop us, but it was kind of interesting. The city went ahead and got everything ready to go just in case we won. And we did, and the following day we started digging at Fox Hollow.
When you say you won, was it an election? Was it?
No, a court.
A court
ruling.
Court case.
A court ruling that said we could. They were trying to stop us through the courts, and the judge ruled in our favor. And we started the next day because we figured if we already had part of the project going, that it would be that much more difficult to stop again. So we went forward with it, and it actually Fox Hollow opened during Linda Morton's term as mayor, but I was very proud to have been the one that said, no, we are going forward.
And a very environmentally sensitive
Absolutely,
design and outcome.
And that's what we knew was happening.
I happened to play that course the first summer it opened, and I got to the fifth tee on Meadows and saw an eagle standing there right on the tee markers and right next to Bear Creek, so yeah.
You know, picking up on that, I don't know if very many citizens know what an outstanding golfer their mayor is, but
No.
we had an opportunity as a foursome to play Homestead.
We did.
And the morning we played was a terrible, terrible weather, probably 28 degrees, wind blowing.
Yeah,
and
it was Steve Burkholder.
The mayor at that time was Steve Burkholder, and he was part of the foursome, and
Linda Morton.
Linda Morton was the fourth. Anyway, I arrived at the appointed hour, didn't want to play, looked around and couldn't find Steve Burkholder, made contact with the mayor, made contact with Linda, and found that Steve had asked for one of the assistant pros to take him up on the range because he had never played golf.
Yeah, that was Steve's first exposure to golf, and it was 30 degrees and snowing and raining and windy, and I'm not sure he's been back.
He teed the ball up, and the first 5 whiffs confirmed that he had never played. But anyway, fortunately the weather was such that we got to quit at the end of about 7 holes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a memorable day.
Mayor, I have a story that I want to tell because it's never been told before. I realized, I don't know if you
we're ready, Jim.
I don't know if you happen to see the full-page article in the Post about a week or so ago about Green Mountain.
I sure did.
That brought to mind the fact that nobody living knows this story except me. And that's how the dedication of the area now known as Green Mountain Park came about. A fellow by the name of John Hayden's father was named William Oakey Hayden. They owned all the hogback from Garrison West, which included Green Mountain. I got pretty well acquainted with John Hayden to the point that I had business in Arizona and he lived in Arizona, and we made contact and went out to his home. We had probably the strongest Scotch and water that I have ever had. And toward the end of that Scotch and water, I said, John, have you ever thought about giving some property in Green Mountain to the city of Lakewood? He said, no, not really, but I might consider it. Well, I'm thinking of maybe 50 or 60 acres somewhere. Well, it came about that 500 and some acres became Green Mountain. And that's the story of how.
So I'm learning today so much of our legacy is based upon a ping pong table and Scotch and water.
Right. And a good question.
A good question, a very well-timed question. That's
down
right.
home administration.
Yeah, that's right. Carl, you went on to 30 years with the Lakewood Building Authority.
That's right.
And tell us a little bit about what the authority is. You've literally left a mark on
Well, the Lakewood Building Authority is essentially a public corporation. It's established by the government of the city of Lakewood, but it is an authority that operates independently of the city. And our job primarily is to provide financing for public buildings that the city requires. And I would say that our biggest success stories have been the two city halls. The first one now is now the courts and the police department. Second one, which is here, which was then, I think, the nucleus that then allowed Lakewood Commons to come into existence as we know it now. We've also been able to fund the golf courses, right. Two of them, of course. Now, we had to mortgage the police building to do it because us Standard & Poor wouldn't have let us use a golf course. But the whole thing has been a very successful way of publicly financing buildings at very favorable rates in terms of interest rates and so on. We've also been able to support the refurbishing of many of the recreation centers in the city. And so it's been a very successful operation in terms of bringing quality facilities to the city of Lakewood.
Any particular project you're most proud of?
I would say the city halls, very much so, but I'm also proud of the fact that once we were able to break through on this quadrant over here where Lakewood Commons is now, that then spread over and eventually brought about Belmar.
That's exactly
and
right.
so as a result, I think that the effect that it produced for the benefit of the city has been very great, and I'm very proud of those projects. But all I did was help pay for them, as did the taxpayers of the city too.
A
right?
very important
That's right.
component. Right. Well, what else? Colorful times. Back. I know you all have some stories. I'm trying to draw them out of you.
Yes. You mentioned the city hall. The first city hall is an interesting story in itself. I had been on the school board prior to the election of the city, and I still had some friends in the administration, and I had asked them in the summer of '69, I said, you know, you've got that old administration building at 1580 Yarrow on the market. Don't try too hard to sell that, because if I'm successful, I'd like to negotiate with you for City Hall. Well, 1580 Yarrow was on the market for $300,000. And made contact the week after the election and suggested that we get an up-to-date appraisal. The appraisal came in at $180,000 for that building. And not being satisfied, I said, you know, Lakewood represents about 40% of the bricks and mortar of Jefferson County. Why don't we take a reduction of 40%? They said, okay.
They bought it, huh?
So we're now down to, I think, 118,000. And I said, you know, there's one other problem. We don't have any money. Could we pay for that over 7 years at no interest? They said, okay. Wow. So that's how we...
Boy, those were the days, Jim.
That's how we got it.
We moved from that era to my time, and this is actually before I was even on city council, and I was a part of the committee to determine if we needed a new municipal center. This is before the first one Carl was talking about. And Roger Reicher of First Bank chaired that committee, and I was a citizen member of it. And we were charged with, do we need a municipal center? If so, where should it be? How big should it be? How do we pay for it, etc. So we sat down with, at that time, City Hall was in space at 44 Union on one floor of that particular building. So we sat down and worked and worked and worked and came up with our recommendations, which went to council, and for a little while they kind of died and went away, and there was a bit of controversy over some other issues, but then they came back again, and then ultimately there was a decision made to go ahead and build the first Lakewood Municipal Center. So I had the pleasure of being the citizen who served to create the plans for that building, and then by the time it opened, I was the mayor who presided at the grand opening of that particular facility. So it was really a heartwarming experience to get to do that and to be so proud of that facility. I can still remember the day that it was opening and the ribbon cutting was scheduled for some time or other, and we looked out the mayor's office. We'd been in for a month or two, sort of getting some kinks out, and we looked out, and on the hillside right outside my window were probably 100 people out there laying sod like little ants all over, putting the sod down so that it would all be there for the groundbreaking that afternoon. And it looked beautiful, and we were ready.
Well, Lakewood has certainly come a long ways in the last 40 years, and we owe our current state to you all.
Let me just add
to
one perspective that I think is really interesting. You're mayor number 7, is that correct?
Yes.
And none of us, as mayor, have ever run against any of the other mayors. We always kind of like, Jim was here, the next person came along, the next one, and I think that has meant something for the city because we've never had the competitiveness of, you know, I beat you or you beat me or whatever. We work together, and I think we all have shared a common vision, and I think each of us as mayor has built on the accomplishments of the person before us, and none of us have been the kind of, I need to steal the spotlight. It's kind of like, I did this. Linda Morton took Lakewood to a next higher level than what I had done because she built on what I did and moved forward, and then Steve and now yourself. And you know, the former mayor group is very compatible, and we have a good time, and we get together for lunch, and we have a good time telling the old stories. So
well, it's an honor just to sit with all of you today, and a privilege to follow in your tracks. And as I said earlier, you've left a legacy of great leadership and of integrity. And I tell people that are on city council or thinking about running for city council that these are chairs that belong to the citizens of Lakewood, and it's our privilege to occupy them for a relatively short period of time, and our duty to carry forward the traditions that you have laid to our successors. So,
and I might like to add that tone and of leadership quality, I think the citizens have come to respect that tremendously, and I think that was really evident in the sales tax election we had. When we asked them for what some people dubbed a 50% increase from 2 to 3 cents, and the citizens supported it.
And we're a lot better off today because of it.
Yes.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all very, very much. As I say, it's just been an honor to be in the same room with you today and hear some of the stories from the founding days of Lakewood. Thank you very much.
thank you.
When we return, we will learn about the 40 and fireworks celebration at Lakewood on Parade.